I mean, I know I definitely did think about what does all this mean? Okay, I need to like go out and help other people. I think that mostly manifested itself in I need to share my story so that if there's anybody else out there who's young and healthy and doesn't have any risk factors for having a stroke, that hopefully me sharing my story will help them and they will share it with other people.
You're listening to The Creative Imposter, episode number 77. Welcome to The Creative Imposter. I'm Andrea Klunder, and today's episode is all about time. Things that take time, that take longer than you feel like they should, and the patience required to just be okay with that. I'm talking about the time it takes to receive a diagnosis for a mysterious and rare disease after you have a seemingly out-of-the-blue stroke in your mid-30s. I'm talking about the time it takes to recover from brain surgery once you receive that diagnosis. And I'm talking about the time it takes to craft a one-woman show with 16 characters around the story of your experience with this medical crisis. Today's guest is actor, writer, director, and voiceover artist Nilsa Reyna. Nilsa does all of these things in New York City in addition to a day job at a corporate law firm on 42nd Street, which makes me want to sing Broadway musicals, but I'll spare you that right now. Nilsa and I met way back when she was running her own theater company in Chicago, and she came to an event that I was hosting and shared with us an early draft of that one-woman show, which at that time was called The Care I Need and has since evolved into a show called Stroke Vagina. More on that later. We're sharing Nilsa's story on May 6th in honor of World Moyamoya Day. And yes, Moyamoya is a thing. It happens to be the name for the diagnosis that she eventually received to explain why that stroke occurred. And you can learn more about how to connect with Nilsa, follow her work, and also more about Moyamoya from the Stanford Medical website, all of which will be linked in the show notes for this episode in the description in your listening app and at thecreativeimpostor.com/077 for episode 77. Again, that's thecreativeimpostor.com/077. And if Nilsa's story moves you, I invite you to share this episode with a friend or on social media. You can connect with me and join the conversation in the Creative Imposter Facebook group over at thecreativeimpostor.com/FB. Okay, let's tune in with actor, writer, director Nilsa Reyna. I can't remember how long ago I met you, but I met you originally when you were living in Chicago through mutual friends. Mm-hmm. And I remember that there was a time in which I was hosting a creativity salon. I'm not sure even what I was calling that event at the time, but I was hosting this monthly gathering where a bunch of creative women from different disciplines would get together and share something that they were working on. So that could be anything. It could be a piece of visual art, an audition piece, or it could be a film, or it could be something that they were writing. And you actually shared your one-woman show that you were writing. Do you remember this at all?
I do. I actually, it was a transition definitely in my life. And I think it was called a creativity salon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a small group of women and we worked in multiple disciplines. And at that time I was calling my solo show, The Care I Need. It's now called Stroke Vagina, because there's a scene in it that I wrote that if you see it, whenever it's produced, the title makes sense. But I most definitely remember that it was the first time I had shared such intimate writing, and I was sharing the story of having a stroke. I had just had a stroke, I think, a couple of months previous to that, and I started writing as part therapy And I just really wanted to get my story out there.
Do you remember how long ago that was? I feel like that has to be more than 5 years ago.
Yes, I think it has almost been 7. And I remember this because I have a big thing on my calendar. I believe it's May 9th is my stroke anniversary. And that was 7 years ago. So it was shortly after.
Do you celebrate your anniversaries?
I kind of do, because during the course of when I was rehabbing and healing and recovering, the occupational therapist that I initially worked with, I think I said something like stroke victim, and she corrected me and she's like, no, you're a stroke survivor. And so I make sure to do something. I don't necessarily have a party or anything like that, but I just make sure to remember it in some way, whether it's having coffee with somebody or mentioning it or doing a social media post, or maybe just like breathing in and doing some breathing exercises. I mark it with that.
How old were you at the time of having a stroke? Because when I hear of that happening to someone, I think of somebody who is older or somebody who has an extremely high stress job or lifestyle, like a stockbroker or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I was 36 going on 37. So that is considered young to have a stroke. And that's why it was so puzzling to the medical community and any doctor that I talked to, because I didn't fit the profile and I didn't really have risk factors or anything like that. So they were just like, well, we'll wait and see. Let's do some more tests. And I sort of went almost 6 years without having a diagnosis.
How did you know that that's what was happening, that you were having a stroke?
I actually didn't know. I mean, I knew something was wrong. So back in like 2011, I had been having these, sort of like weird symptoms, like tingly, burning sensation at various parts of my arm. But I couldn't tell like what it was. It would just go away. I thought it was like a pinched nerve, or, I was just super stressed because at that time I was also working a full-time day job. I was running a theater company. I was just like running myself ragged. And I had gone to the doctor and I had mentioned it, and not that they dismissed it, but everything else checked out. So basically what happened is I was at work and I worked for a doctor, ironically. I was taking dictation for him, and all of a sudden my hand stopped working. Like I couldn't type, and I felt a little weird, but I was okay. I didn't have the classic symptoms of slurred speech, and, I didn't have a big, massive headache. I felt okay. And he actually did a neurological exam in the office, and he's like, okay, I think you're fine, but maybe you should take a break. And I remember it was the weekend before, the weekend before Mother's Day, and I needed to mail a gift to my mom in Texas. And so I took a break and I went to the post office and I couldn't write the label out. So then I made some doctor appointments, and again, they couldn't tell what was wrong with me. And they're like, well, I think you're okay. I set up some more appointments. A friend referred me to her chiropractor, and she was like, it sounds like it might be just something really specific that a regular doctor would miss. So I went to the appointment, and he thought that I had a pinched nerve, and he gave me some exercises to help release things, and it kind of helped. And the plan was to do exercises for a few days, come back and see him. So, I took the weekend really easy. I made sure I rested, but I was just extremely exhausted. So I went back and we did the exercises, and I wasn't really well. I mean, I appeared fine, but he knew that there was something wrong. So he sent me to do an MRA of my head, brain, and neck. He thought that I might have MS, and that's also something that's very hard to diagnose.
Yeah.
So I got into some place right away. And it was there that they asked if they could do the contrast, and I'd never had one before. And they told me, I see some findings in your brain. So I knew right then and there that there was something terribly wrong. And then they actually sort of gave me the results there. They weren't supposed to. They just said that I'd had a stroke. It was a small one, but they also saw like these white dots that were consistent with TIAs, so like mini strokes. And they said, I don't think you need to go to the emergency room. You appear fine, but you need to see a neurologist immediately. So that that just like freaked me out. I did not know what to think. I almost have no words all these years, but...
Yeah, because you're innocently going about living your life in your mid-30s and working and doing your creative thing and acting and running this theater company. And then suddenly you're blindsided by this mysterious thing. And I can imagine it's not like, oh, this thing happened and I went to the doctor and they told me this happened and I got this terrible traumatic news. Like that in and of itself would be bad, but it was like to have to keep going to this person and say, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, something's not right, but you seem fine. But I can't even imagine what that was like emotionally for you to be suddenly thrown into this maze of trying to figure things out.
Yeah, it brings up a whole host of feelings. That night was really strange because I remember I was in the MRI tube and, you can't move. No, I really had to use the bathroom and they're like, no, can you wait? And I was like, all right. And so I was just in there and just the experience of that, like my body tensed up was like, no, you need to go to the ER and I even called my ex-husband, which see what's going on. Things had ended eventually like on a good note. And he was just, sort of like, are you okay? And called some friends, and I was single at the time and I lived alone. So I went back to my studio apartment and was just really freaked out. I don't know how kicked up my anxiety levels. I then started the process of trying to get in to see a neurologist and I couldn't. I worked at Northwestern at the time and I couldn't get as strictly as possible. And I went to all my appointments and did all the tests and things and still nothing. But I eventually just sort of started, I guess, accepting is a good word, of just accepting that I had something, but I wasn't going to take no for an answer. And even though I was doing the wait and see approach, as many of the doctors had suggested, I was still staying on top of everything. I was doing research. I was talking to people. And eventually when I decided to move to New York, I thought it was a really good thing because I would also have access to more healthcare systems. And then possibly with more people and more experiences, I would hopefully get a diagnosis. But ironically, that didn't happen until I was here for 6 years. Anytime I see a new doctor, they're always shocked at my story. And she was like, no, I think you have Moyamoya. I'm sorry. And I'm like, what?
Wait, 6 years of going to appointments, doing assessments, doing tests, doing a ton of research, doing what I have recently come to discover everyone says whenever you have some kind of major health mystery or health crisis going on is you have to be your own advocate. And that sounds like exactly what you were doing.
Absolutely.
Were you continuing to have symptoms over this whole 6-year period, or had it kind of just faded into the background with no explanation or no recurrence?
I would say it's a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. So once you have a stroke, there are many variables. And I'm only learning this now, if you're not properly hydrated, or if you're tired, you sometimes have some symptoms that might appear to be either a TIA or maybe even mini stroke. So it gets kind of confusing.
What's a TIA?
I'm going to mispronounce it, but it's it's a transient ischemic attack.
Okay.
So it's basically like a very small, so they call it mini stroke. It's a warning that a stroke is probable, that it's probably going to occur.
Okay.
The symptoms didn't necessarily come back. Maybe it was minor. Sometimes I would feel some tingly sensations. And I think that's due to the damage that's been caused by the stroke. Mm-hmm. And sometimes things don't always come back 100%. I was super lucky. The only real damage that I had was to my right hand. I think I'm at 85%. All of those things did eventually sort of start to fade into the background. it's just like I had to keep moving on, and I came to New York to pursue an acting career, and then I started writing more and doing a bunch of other things. And so I had to like keep focused and keep going, although I did find that I had to slow down tremendously because I just couldn't keep up with the pace, nor the pace of New York, because if you do that, you just like get swept up and you're not healthy. So I've had to like really pull back a lot.
I wanted to come back to the solo show that you were writing that was originally called The Care I Need. And you said you started writing that sort of as a therapeutic process. Was that something that somebody recommended to you to do, or is that something that you just decided or figured out might be helpful?
Oh, I think it was a combination. I had always admired solo shows. One of my favorites had been Whoopi Goldberg's show that she had on Broadway where she played all of these characters. Mm-hmm. So I've always been drawn to work like that, John Leguizamo's shows. And I felt like I wanted to do something to shake things up. I wasn't known to be a character actress. People sort of assumed that because I tend to be on the quieter side that I don't know, maybe I can't do like a big loud character. So I wanted to portray all of these people that had come into my life, all the doctors and my ex-husband and, all the different relationships that I had encountered in the last, 5 years or so. That combined with just writing the experience and processing things and trying to write my anxiety away. Mm-hmm. But also it was really good for me because initially I was just writing it down on paper, and that was really hard for me to do because I was going to occupational therapy, and I think I started out with like 2 pounds because I couldn't do much else. And one of my goals in occupational therapy was to be able to carry 2 bags of groceries from the grocery store to my apartment by myself.
Wow.
That then was like the biggest hurdle that I had to overcome at that time. So I was doing all of these things, and then I found it helped me physically, it helped me mentally, and I just became more open and vulnerable to my situation, and it helped me tremendously.
And besides that, that initial sort of work in progress reading that we did in Chicago, did you ever have a chance to perform it? How did it evolve? What happened from there with that work?
Yeah, a lot has happened, fortunately. So I found that I just had to write the show very slow, just because I had to go at my own pace, and my pace was much slower than many people expected. I also found that I initially started writing the story as more of a narrative type of story. Like the writing was more geared towards writing a memoir or possibly something that you would see at the Moth. But then I decided that I wanted to adapt it for the stage. And then doing that, you have to make it more active. You have to do more show than telling. So then I had to learn the whole process of playwriting. Even though I've been an actor for many, many years, I didn't really know what the process was. So I started taking classes. I did some writers' retreats. I presented some works in progress. I eventually got several staged readings, and I got to perform it. And I've performed various drafts. Thankfully, I've had many wonderful theater companies embrace me and give me the opportunity to do so. I had decided in 2018 that I was going to produce it in 2019, that I would actually produce it around this time in May of 2019. But then when my third neurologist was like, I think you have Moyamoya, we should do some more tests. And when we did very extensive MRIs and MRAs with contrast, things remained stable, like everything was good, but she really thought that I needed to go get a second opinion from Stanford at the Stanford Moyamoya Center with a particular neurosurgeon, Dr. Steinberg. All of those plans got put on hold because all of a sudden I had gotten the diagnosis that I have Moyamoya. And then I had brain surgery in December of 2018. So I'm now like 4 months post-surgery. I'm recovering very nicely, but now things are just kind of, they're moving slowly. I have had another staged reading of it, but this time with a multi-character cast. And I just sat back as the playwright and I listened to the audience for the first time, and it was amazing.
Okay, I have so many questions. First of all, we're Facebook friends, and I've been following your story, not carefully, but when I saw this diagnosis of Moyamoya, I definitely had never heard of that in my life. One. Yes. Two, when I saw that you were going to be having brain surgery, I kind of had to read it multiple times because it seemed so extreme and also like one of the most terrifying things that I could imagine. And
yes,
the thing that really blew me away was when you posted a series of photos from immediately following the surgery through like maybe over the course of a couple of weeks post-surgery. And I at once was like, wow, that's really cool for her to post these. And I don't want to say like, oh, it was really inspiring to see you going through this recovery. Being as that it kind of has timed, with some health things that I'm going through, it was kind of like, wow, if Nilsa can go through this and be this brave about it, like this is really supporting me emotionally in a very, like, she doesn't even know that she's supporting me emotionally through this. So this big diagnosis of this mysterious thing, like, I mean, you probably had never heard of Moyamoya when you received that diagnosis as well.
Well, I actually had heard of it just because when I was doing research, it had come up. I had subscribed to, I think it was American Heart Association, American Stroke Association, and every month they profile certain things. And I think it was in 2015, maybe, there was a profile about this mysterious disease called Moyamoya. And so basically, I'll try to give some background about it without sounding too clinical, but it's rare. It means a puff of smoke in Japanese. And it was originally thought to affect the Asian population, but specifically children. And then they thought that it would affect both sides of the brain. And I think that was why some of the doctors were just kind of stumped with what I had, because my issue is just on the left side of my brain. They were looking at the profile of like, okay, it's Asian children, but now they've found out that it's not just children, it's adults too, and people from all races and ethnicities. There's weak blood vessels that multiply around a blocked artery to protect the brain from blockage. And when doctors order a cerebral angiogram, which is a brain angiogram, it appears like a puff of smoke because sometimes the vessels have like given out and just sort of looks wispy. In my case, when I went to see Dr. Steinberg at Stanford, he sat with me and we discussed all of my scans, and nobody had ever done that. Now, I did have access to all of my images, and I used to always read my reports, but I never actually looked at the pictures. But I wouldn't have known what I was looking at. So I was really happy that he went through everything what I was seeing, and he pulled up the right side of my brain and everything looked healthy and bright. And then he pulled up the left side of my brain and it looked like I didn't have a left internal carotid artery. And I'm saying that like very specifically because that is typically the area that Moyamoya affects. And so it looked like dark, like there was nothing there. That just freaked me out. Yeah. Like when then, we were talking surgery and I was like, oh, all right, I need to have it because there's no cure for the disease and they can't go in there and actually like clean out the arteries in the way that they do when they've been hardened and thickened by arteriosclerosis. Like it just doesn't work for some reason. So they typically do a bypass and do direct and indirect vascularization surgery. It's pretty, I know, and this is where it starts to sound very medical, but I basically had a cranial STA to MCA bypass, and that resulted in twice the blood flow to my brain.
Okay, so what did that feel like to have that much blood coming into your brain that you were not and also, is this, I don't know if you know the answer to this, like, is this something that you likely have been living with your entire life without knowing, or is it something that develops later, or they have no idea?
Kind of a little of everything that you said.
Okay.
So they initially thought, just generically, they thought that I had some congenital issue from birth. I think they would describe it as like a faulty artery, like somehow either it was just more narrow, but like you wouldn't think of it. But there is so much talk now about it being genetic. And I think that they've also identified some genes that link everything together, but then everyone's different. So they had kind of described it to me as, think of it as something like cancer, like all of a sudden some events combine and then the genes mutate and then you have, this event. And I was like, okay, but there's so much out there. I feel like people are finally starting to become a little bit more aware and are studying it. And I also think that it's been very much underdiagnosed, which is why it's still rare.
Coming back to the blood in your brain.
Yes.
What was that experience like?
Oh, it was nothing like I thought. I actually did not have a lot of pain. I was so lucky. I think that the worst that the pain got was maybe a 4, and that was rare. I spent about, I would say, almost 2 days in the hospital. That's also not common. 3 to 4 days is common when you have a bypass. I just did so well from the start. Everything was fine. I woke up pretty quickly, wasn't in too much pain. And I was just sort of like the model patient that they want to see, which was exciting. But then I also got really anxious about that because I was like, oh, well, I know how this can happen, because I had been monitoring this Facebook group where people post about their experiences. And I know, things happen, like you typically end up with like a very bruised eye, like a huge black eye on the side of the surgery, and there's swelling and there can be a lot of pain. And I was just so anxious that I was going to start to have something. So then my blood pressure started to go up more than what they wanted. So they're like, wait, try to relax and calm down and breathe. So I had to battle that. For me, what affected me most is being anxious and then also not sleeping, because you're in the hospital and they're prodding and poking you. And you also don't feel the effects of the brain surgery necessarily right away. I know that I would have some bursts of energy where I'd be like, I've never felt this good. But then it would kind of come crashing down because everything is, you're in recovery and things are healing. So it wasn't until about 2 weeks later where I started to feel the rewiring, or like the rebooting, as I like to call it. I guess as the blood flow was flowing to the other side of my body and the parts that had been damaged from the stroke, I started to feel like I could pick up a glass with my right hand, and it was like I was having an outer body experience, because I could really grip it, and I felt like I hadn't had that much strength since prior to my stroke. But then that also made me more anxious. Like for me, I was battling the anxiety more so than the pain. And then I was afraid that I was having another episode or a stroke, because that can happen. So it was all very confusing, but exciting at the same time.
This is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And I don't know if this experience has been similar for you, in that when something major happens health-wise or in relation to our body, or we undergo some traumatic experience like a surgery, I'm speaking on behalf of all humankind, because I think that we as humans are naturally creative and we naturally understand things in context of story and meaning. And my own personal experience, I think, is not unique in that I feel this desire to ascribe some kind of meaning or some kind of message or some kind of thing that I am supposed to learn, or way in which I am supposed to grow as a result of this, which sounds really annoying and irritating even as I'm saying it out loud. But, because people say, oh, well, there's nothing that you did to cause this. There's nothing that you could have done to prevent this, but I can't help feeling like, but I should now be doing something better or change my relationship to stress or the way I work. Did any of that come up for you? And, or a better way to ask that, I guess, is how has this whole experience changed anything about the way that you live your life or your relationship to your work or your creative process?
I definitely think that it has changed me. I sometimes wonder if I'm slipping back into my old habits and patterns in terms of taking on too much work and not managing my stress levels and not getting enough sleep. I mean, I know I definitely did think about what does all this mean? Okay, I need to like go out and help other people. I think that mostly manifested itself in I need to share my story so that if there's anybody else out there who's young and healthy and doesn't have any risk factors for having a stroke, or to help any family members, that hopefully me sharing my story will help them and they will share it with other people. I was hoping that it would translate not just to strokes, but into other things. Right now, the transition back to working a day job has been the hardest for me. I did go back to work a month too early. I took 2 months off. I was feeling pretty good, although I had to pace myself. The Moyamoya Center advised me to just take the 2 months off. They're like, this is a lot. And, you know, you just need to rest and recover and sleep. But, you know, financially, I had to go back to work. And it's been hard working a full-time day job and then also pursuing artistic endeavors.
Yeah.
And I've been pretty good about not overloading myself, but then sometimes it's inevitable. Things get stacked up, or there's a friend that you haven't seen in like 5 years and they come to town and visit. And the only time that you can see them is on this specific day, specific hour. And then it's like, okay, I need to get more sleep. So I think sometimes it's just, I don't know, just being okay with not being so perfect and not being the model patient and being kind to yourself.
What do you think is next for you and your story? Whether that be, I know that you mentioned having other actors working on your show. So I'm imagining that means that somebody was playing you.
Yes.
What's next for you creatively?
Well, I definitely want to finish the show. I want to have it fully produced with me in not just the lead role, but I wrote 16 characters. And so once that I'm up to being able to portray all the 16 characters again, because I know that I don't quite have the energy, and then there's the memorization. Once I'm up to it, then I will produce it, and I'm going to do probably like a combo stage show / Netflix type special, something that you would see on Netflix maybe. I'm going to have it filmed, and then maybe I'll put it away. Like if other people want to produce it, that is awesome. I would love that, and I would love to see another cast portray me and all the other characters. And then I have so many other projects that are started. I have another full-length play called Legends of Texas, which examines the gun culture, gun control, gun activists, and then I have other projects. My new one's called A Puff of Smoke, and it's basically about managing Moyamoya / examining the weed culture, and then also dealing with mental illness. And then, of course, as everybody is always working on web series and things like that, I also have several that I'm working on.
What advice do you have? I don't know, it's maybe presumptuous to assume that you have advice, but do you have any advice for someone, a creative person who is experiencing some kind of traumatic thing like this, or some kind of health challenge, or something that's happening in their life that they want to explore creatively, whether that be through writing or whether that be through performance or anything like that? What kind of advice do you have for somebody who wants to approach their own story in a creative way?
I definitely would encourage anybody that wants to tell their story in whatever form it is that they want to tell it through, to do it, to surround yourself with people that support you, surround yourself with people that have a little bit more knowledge about what it is that you're trying to do, if you do so in fact need that help. I would also say just be patient with yourself. It may take much longer than you think, and let yourself off the hook. If you find that that isn't exactly the project that you want to do or the story you want to tell because things have transformed, or you feel like you need to be doing something else, that it's okay.
Nilsa, is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners before we say goodbye?
Oh, yes, that's a good question. I think I just want to say that something that you said earlier in the podcast is that everybody's creative and everybody's unique, and everyone has the capacity to invoke creativity in their work, whatever it is, and that you should embrace that fully and not be afraid to do so.
It might sound easy to take the story of something that happened in your life and turn it into a creative work, a play, a story, a book, a poem, a work of art. It's not that easy. And as Nilsa mentioned, sometimes it just takes time and you need to be patient with yourself. I know for me, in the recovery that I've been going through, now 8 weeks out from my surgery, it feels extremely slow. 4 to 6 weeks, they said. 4 to 6 weeks is nothing. But at the time, it sounded so long. And now here we are, 8 weeks, and I'm still recovering. It takes time. My body feels tired. My brain feels tired. It takes energy. And I'm not even in a place where I could take this whole experience and transform it into a play, for example. But if you've had some kind of major trauma or crisis in your life, and if you are in a place where you could write about it, whether or not you actually ever share that thing that you're creating from that experience, I think there's tremendous value there. And I love that Nilsa encourages us to go for it, to take a look at how you can transform that into a creative work and express the truth of our unique experience. And creating that work is not just selfish. It's not just therapeutic for you, but sharing your story in a creative way can also be deeply affirming, connecting, and supporting for other people who are experiencing something in their own lives. So I'm curious, if you're listening to this right now and you're like, I did that. I created something, wrote something, painted something, performed something based on a trauma that happened in my life, or a medical crisis, or a health issue that I experienced. I'd love for you to share it in our community over in the Creative Imposter Facebook group. It's linked in the show notes for this episode, along with links to Nilsa's work and information about Moyamoya in your app description, and at thecreativeimposter.com/077. Join the Facebook group and let us see what you're creating. This episode was mixed by Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. Thank you so much to Nilsa for sharing your story with us. I thank you so much for listening. And this week, I am wishing you patience, I am wishing you clarity, and I am wishing you the opportunity to find a new and creative way to express your own truth.